very much, Mr. Gapes. It is, as ever, a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I'm extremely glad to have discovered just seconds ago that I'm not summing up at the end of this debate. I suddenly, being relatively new to this place, had kittens that thought that I might have just completely misunderstood the procedure, but I think I've got it right at this stage. The very first time that what I regard as being a fairly serious issue really crossed my radar was shortly after my mother died. And you can call me sentimental, if you will, and I'm sure many will. But I decided that it would be too sad to see my mother's old telephone number go back to some anonymous BT file. And she'd had it all her life. And so for that reason, I thought that I would ask for my own telephone number to be deleted, and I would take on my mother's old telephone number. This is 3 years ago. I have to say that that was when the trouble started. Why do these calls always seem to come at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon? At least that is my impression. I don't know. But they do. And they go like this. Hello. If you're a pensioner or on benefits, you'll be very interested to know of a central heating scheme for which you could be eligible. Now, if I had a penny for each one of these telephone calls, I'd have a few quid by now. And the first point I want to make is that there's actually nothing inherently wrong at all with the idea of people in need receiving new and efficient central heating systems paid for either by a government grant or a levy scheme from a large utility company. The good intention behind this scheme cannot be faulted. After all, it is simply about making those in need warm and able to afford the cost of being warm. However, sadly, the trouble comes because of the fact that the recipient of the new central heating system has not paid for it directly themselves. For example, the Consumer Contracts Information Cancellation and Additional Charges Regulations 2013 do not apply. These regulations make detailed and pretty stringent requirements of businesses who sell goods and services off premises, i.e. door-to-door. Consumers must be given very detailed paperwork, and they also have the right to a cooling-off period. In fairness, in absolute fairness, there are other consumer laws that apply. But I have to tell you, as an MP and as a citizen, very often making these regulations actually apply, actually bite, can prove to be a very real challenge. I don't want to go into the detail of that during the short time I have available, but I'm pretty sure that every MP in this place will have some experience of this issue. So, I go back to my first words. People being called and asked if they would like a new boiler and heating system. Sadly, very sadly, all too often we hear stories of cowboy installations. In some cases, the heating system is defective, and getting it put right can prove a near impossible challenge for the household involved.
Would the honourable gentleman give way?
I would gladly give way.
I thank him for giving way. Does he also agree that, related to the matters that he's raising today, that across the UK, certainly in Scotland, we have many, many people who have fallen victim to the Helms green energy scandal, where customers have been left feeling very let down and are pleading with the UK government to directly intervene to assist them out of the mess that they have found after this company, Cole Caldham, has gone into liquidation and left them high and dry?
Yes, the honourable member makes a very fair point, and as a fellow Scot, I've come across this kind of case all too frequently, and sadly, it's not a nice example, it's a nasty example of what I'm on about. And I will return to the sort of regulatory scheme we can think about to try and tackle this issue. And of course, it's at this point that the householder, the person in trouble, turns to the MP very often for help. And that's why I'm very pleased that this debate is occurring today. Now, I have no doubt that Her Majesty's Government and the Minister with us today will wish to do everything to help sort out the situation. And accordingly, I wonder if I may just make a few suggestions. Firstly this, that there perhaps ought to be some independent body, truly independent body. It could possibly be administered by our local authorities, our local government, an independent body that could carry out an assessment as to the actual need for a particular household to be considered for a new central heating system. This would, I suggest, achieve two things. First of all, it would nip in the bud the rather extraordinary situation, which I'm sure my Scottish colleague will recognise, whereby virtually new boilers and heating systems are being unnecessarily removed and replaced, when in fact there's no need for this to happen. It might just be that some mechanical tweaking of the system might have made it work better. But sadly, this is happening. And that is, I would suggest, a waste of money. Secondly, I hope that my suggestion would tackle the thorny situation of where we have a really old heating system, 30, 40 years or more old, which is highly inefficient, but for reasons I know not, but unfortunately, a system which contractors sometimes hesitate to replace. There's something wrong in the system about that. There is the evidence there, and I do suggest that the Minister's Department might well to look at this particular aspect of the issue. My second suggestion today is that there should be an accreditation system for the businesses installing this equipment. After all, in the building world, we have building control regulations. We all know them. They run in parallel with planning applications and planning conditions. These regulations cover all manner of issues about the design and construction of a new build. Everything from the steepness of a staircase to the load-bearing potential of roof trusses. The fact is that I think I can say throughout the whole of the UK, these rules work well, which is, I believe, why we don't have houses falling on top of our heads. Some people may get a bit irritated when building control come out and say, no, you've not done it right, but they're there for the best of reasons. And it does seem to me, therefore, that some similar regime could be applied to heating systems purchased through grants and levies. Because the bottom line is this, is if you get a heating system that is installed wrongly, it can actually, in the wrong circumstances, be actually quite dangerous and could cause a household fire. My third and last suggestion is that after the householder has agreed to a system being installed, there should be, as I've already mentioned, be a cooling off period during which the householder is allowed to change his or her mind. Indeed, I might suggest to the Minister that it could be at this point that my first suggestion could kick in. By this I mean that a householder says to the person on the other end of the telephone, yes, I like the sound of a new central heating system, but then it should be the law that he or she has it pointed out to them that this is the point when their possible scheme must be run past the independent body that I mentioned earlier, before they proceed, that the independent body agrees with the householder and says, yes, your system could do with upgrading, and this suitably accredited firm might be just the people to do it for you.
Would the Honourable Gentleman give way?
I will.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for pointing out how in the future we can improve the situation of some very unfortunate experiences our constituents have had. But I think, and I hope the Minister would agree, that before we move forward, that part of moving forward is trying to address some of the huge injustices that have taken place, certainly for some of my constituents, and I know much further afield than that, where we have the situation currently where consumers cannot sell their houses because of the situation with, like, the Helms deals. where they have solar panels that have been fitted in good faith, but they find they're not in the feed-in tariff and they cannot register for it. They've been missold credit deals. They are paying more for their electricity than they were before, and they are tied into payment contracts with energy suppliers for 2 decades. And I would wonder what the honourable gentleman would think about fixing those injustices before. Indeed, but I just wondered
yes, they will be
fixing
brief.
them before we move forward.
Yes, Jamie Stone.
Well, Mr. Capes, I have to say to you that it is a pleasure, actually, to take an intervention of that quality, because I think it contributes to the nature of the point we're trying to put over. And yes, it can affect the sale of a house, exactly the wise point made by the honourable member. Now, when I say that a householder, once they've said, yes, we like the idea of the central heating system, should then have to go to this independent person to say, do you or don't you actually need it? I wouldn't want to rule out one thing. I wouldn't want to make the rule absolute. For instance, social work and, to an extent, the NHS will very possibly have a good idea as to which households might benefit from a government grant or levy scheme heating system, but where the householder, him or herself, might not feel inclined, for whatever reason, to either reply to the telephone call or to make an independent application. So sometimes there has to be a push from a different angle to make sure that person is getting the best deal. I want to conclude by ending up where I started. It's about these telephone calls. A lot of people find them intrusive, but actually for some they are quite frightening, something which many people absolutely do not need. In the case of my own telephone number, my late mother's, my wife will tell you that she's sick and tired of telling these firms that my mother is no longer with us. Quite curiously, as an anecdote, one of our neighbours, a doctor's widow who is no fool whatsoever, finds that when she mentions that she's over 80, the conversation at the other end stops immediately. Why this should be, I have simply no idea, and I will forgive the Minister for not knowing the answer to that curious quirk of fact. I repeat, the good, and I give credit to the government where it's due, the good and kindly intention behind giving someone affordable warm homes cannot, absolutely should not be underestimated. There are various marks of a civilized society, and this, I believe, is surely one of them, and representing one of the, the coldest part of the British Isles at Altnahara. I do rather know what I'm talking about when it keeps to houses warm. And secondly, it is a shame if a number of loopholes lead to unsatisfactory service delivery, and I believe that's what I would suggest to the Minister we have. And there, of course, there are good contractors out there, very proud of the standard of their work, and it would be a real shame, Mr. Gapes, would it not, if their reputation was tarnished by the odd rotten apple. And I would suggest that that sadly is rather the case, and it's simply not fair on the firms who are trying to do their best, and it's simply not fair to the best intention of government, who are, after all, trying to look after old people and make their lives as the highest possible quality. So, whether it is a government grant or a levy scheme, it is all money that can be used to the good of people. Getting this right with the money and targeting it with absolute accuracy is crucial. And to be quite honest with you, my final thought is that the electorate are not stupid. They like to see the public pound being used and targeted to the maximum effect. And I think they expect nothing less of good government. Thank you very much, Mr. Gapes.
The question is that this House has considered protections for new central heating installations. Minister Claire Perry.
Mr. Gapes,